everyone, and thank you all for being with us tonight for our first Thursday's Arts Walk event in celebration of Women's History Month with Barbara Ann Burns, our author here of Sweet Alice, the story of California hotel pioneer Alice Miller Richardson, who was the sister of Frank Miller of Mission Inn fame. My name is Janine Pura-Gamblin, and I'm Programs Coordinator for Inlandi Institute, a literary and cultural arts nonprofit located here in inland Southern California on the ancestral homelands of the Cahuilla, Luiseño, Serrano, and Gabrielino Tonka peoples. This event is brought to you in partnership with Riverside Public Library, with thanks to Friends of the Library, California Humanities, and the California Arts Council. And we'd also like to give a special shout out to Scott Brocious, who is here helping us with the live streaming on some brand new equipment that we have up and running for the first time tonight. So we are delighted to have our friends from the Mission Inn Museum here as well, who will be on hand after the program to sell copies of Sweet Alice. I have my own personal copy right here. And we will also have time for a book signing as well. And now, I'd like to introduce the author of Sweet Alice of Riverside, Tahoe, and Laguna, Barbara Ann Burns. Barbara was interested in the history of her town, Riverside, California, where we all are here tonight. So she took a class to become a docent at the Mission Inn. She was such a good docent, they hired her and she trained new docents for many years. That was when she got curious about Alice Miller Richardson, who turns out to be an amazingly successful, lovable lifetime manager of the Mission Inn and a very memorable figure. Barbara's intent to write something small about her turned into writing a book about her, the woman who really ran the hotel. And with that, let's welcome Barbara Ann Burns.
Good evening, and thank you all for coming. Oh, hi, Ruth. It's good to see you. I love telling Alice's story, so I'm really glad you came out tonight. It's a really interesting story. I need to thank the historical book publisher who published Sweet Alice for me. That's the Font Hill Media Company. And they had an editor that I sent my manuscript to, and he told me he thought it was interesting, engaging, and well-written. And before you knew it, they were sending me a contract. And after that, here we have a book. So I'm really happy to be able to tell you about it. I need to thank Riverside historians. Joan Hall, the late Joan Hall, wrote a lot of really great books. It was Joan Hall that gave me a little tidbit about Alice owning a one block of property in Riverside, or in Laguna. And as it turned out, she owned 40. It started out, and then it went on to about 400. Maurice Hodgson gave me a little tidbit about Alice having worked in Lake Tahoe, which I didn't think would go anywhere. And a third of the book is about how much Alice did at the Tahoe Tavern and how she put that place on the map. So I really need to thank all those people, plus, of course, Steve Leck and Kim Gerald Johnson, who did lots and lots of local Riverside history. And, of course, Ruth McCormick and Celeste Reyes, who work here at the Riverside, or at the library, and helped in tons of things. Okay, so we're going to get started. Here's the slideshow. Now available. You can get it online, or you can get it back there with Stephanie. Thank you very much. Okay, this is our heroine, and this is Alice Miller Richardson, and she was about 45 years old when this was painted. And it was painted right here in Riverside by a famous artist who stayed at the Mission Inn for 3 years, and he wouldn't have gotten back into painting. He was so depressed unless Alice had encouraged him. And there's a whole great story in the book about that. Alice was not a poor woman, as some people thought, though Frank Miller's unheralded younger sister. She lived and worked in this beautiful place, which is our own Mission Inn. And Alice's spot was She also worked in this place, which is the Tahoe Tavern, which was going bankrupt when they called her and asked her to come up and save it. And she put it on the map, and it became the foundation of all Tahoe vacationing in the summertime. That was in 1904. And then she vacationed down here. She bought these two little houses in 1904. Alice lived and worked at the Mission Inn, so she didn't need to pay any rent. She didn't need to buy her own food. She never bought a house here in Riverside. She never bought an orange grove. But when she went and decided to spend her money, which she did quite a bit of from working very hard at the Mission Inn for many, many years, she went down to Laguna Beach and she bought these 2 little cottages, which were built in about 1894. And she also bought 40 acres of land directly south of this. So she went and invested in California real estate right away. And it certainly paid off. Now, this is the earliest picture I have of the Miller family, and we've got Emma, the oldest sister, in the middle, and we've got Frank on the left and Alice on the right. And Frank and Alice, as you can see by their sizes, were pretty close in age. Frank is older, he's sitting, and Alice is standing up, but they are like 5 and 7 in these pictures. And this one was taken in Wisconsin, where they were born, the year that Abraham Lincoln was shot. So that'll give you an idea of the context of what was going on. Their dad was an engineer, and the economy was really bad in Wisconsin, and the weather was terrible, and their mother was sickly. And Dad decided, like a lot of people, to come out to California and see if he could make a living. So that's what he did. He came first. Let me go back here for a second. They came out here, and I want to point out that when they were children, they were the dearest of friends. They were close at birth, and they played together all the time. And here they are as grandparents, still the dearest of friends. That's Alice playing the kazoo, trying to make Frank's grandson laugh. And there's Frank holding his beloved little grandson, Frank Miller Hutchins Jr. Okay, I knew that Frank had a sister Alice, but I didn't know much else about it until I found this article in a Northern California newspaper that said that Alice was one of the most well-known and successful businesswomen in California. And I was shocked because we didn't think of Alice as anything except Frank's little sister around here. So I thought, is this true? And I started to do some more research on it. And I learned how to research doing this thing. I spent a lot of time in the basement of the Metropolitan Museum. I spent a lot of time in the basement of the Riverside Library when the research department was in the basement. I went on the California Digital Index. I went all kinds of places, and I spent about 3 years researching Alice. And I can remember I was so excited when I had 12 pages on her. And after a while, I got it to be 80 pages, and it was worth a book. So that's where we went from there. This is young Alice, and she's got quite a few great qualities that people tell about her. She was known as the world's greatest hostess. She was known as being singularly able to manage a hotel of international employees with kindness and nobility. She has a tendency to treat all the guests in the hotel like their dear, dear friends of the family. And the result was that she created a unique sense of warmth and comfort that was just not found at other hotels, much as other hoteliers might try. So she set the tone for the Mission Inn to become one of the world's finest hotels. Now, how did this happen? She was like 14 years old when she came to Riverside. And her brother was here with her. There's her great brother, Frank Miller. And we do give him a lot of credit for founding Riverside, for establishing all the important things that happen in Riverside, libraries, lyceums, hospitals, roads, trains, everything. He was here and he was doing a lot of stuff, but he wasn't interested in the hotel business like Alice was. And she is the one who ran the hotel. Frank is the kind of guy who would engage guests with stories about his great plans, and he would get your opinion on what you thought of it. But Alice was the kind of girl who would take you on a trip around the Riverside and regale you with stories about all the interesting people she had met being manager of the hotel, all the while encouraging people to come and settle in Riverside. They were big, big boosters of Riverside. So Alice was a woman who got to Riverside when she was about 14, and by the time she was 16, she was running one of the most important businesses in the town. And she held that same job in a growing business for the next 60 years. So Frank was here doing all these great things. She was a woman who, let me tell you this, there's Frank. I'm not trying to belittle Frank at all because he made a great, great contribution to the city of Riverside, but what he did not do was run a hotel room well. Alice was the kind of guy who would put flowers in your room, make sure that there was fresh fruit there all the time. She'd get to know you, introduce you to the other guests who might have something in common with you, take you on tours around Riverside. She was just a swell person. And when the hotel started out, it looked like this little tiny building here. It was a cottage, and guests came onto my stagecoach. And for the first 6 years that the family ran the hotel, Alice was in charge, this teenager. Her brother was not interested in it at all. He was off working in the tin mines and buying a citrus grove and running the little blue grocery store, but he wasn't interested in the hotel until he had $5,000 saved up, and he needed something to invest in. And he wanted to get married, and he needed a place for his wife to live. And all of a sudden, he looked at Alice and he realized that she had created a very, very successful business, and he'd be crazy not to buy it. And the sad thing was that their father had decided he didn't want to be in the hotel business anymore. So Alice was devastated that Dad was about to sell the hotel when Brother Frank comes to the rescue and tells her that he's going to buy it. This was I'm going to read you a little passage here. This was a life changer for Alice. Her brother had given back to her what her father had taken away. Her brother knew how important that job was to her, and her brother, when he was only 23, had such faith in her ability that he took his life savings and bought a hotel because he had no doubt that she would make it profitable. And she, at only 21 years old, had the confidence to let him. And they started in 1880. And Frank bought the hotel, and the caveat of buying the hotel was that Alice had to manage it for him. And she wanted nothing more than to do that. So that's the way their business started. Okay, so there's the stage. But this is the way Alice met you at the front door. She'd tell you it was her job to offer you every hospitality of the inn, from fruit and flowers to peaceful, quiet ambiance. So when they first started out, there was no question that Frank Miller was the proprietor. Notice the print is smaller on Frank's name. Alice down here at the bottom is manager, and she got all the credit she was due. Frank had no problem giving her credit for all the wonderful things she had done to run the airport, run the hotel. But then this guy came to town, and Frank decided that Alice needed someone to help her run the hotel, because it was a lot of work. And this man is known as Frank W. Richardson. And he worked as her assistant, helping her do whatever she needed to do for about the first 5 years that Frank and Alice ran the hotel together. And then they got married. And they had a son, 14 pounds at birth, this young man was, Stanley Richardson, and he was born and raised at the hotel and had a very interesting life because he knew all these interesting people that came and stayed at the Mission. And Alice and Frank Richardson pretty much stayed at the Mission Inn running things when Frank was going off doing his shopping sprees, when he was going off thinking about building a hotel in Yosemite, when he was collecting art, when he was traveling around the world learning how to run a better hotel and bringing that advice back to Alice. They were staying at home running the Raising Stanley. Now the reason that the father left the hotel business and he wasn't interested in it at all was because he was really an engineer and a surveyor. And the first place he went to after he left Riverside was Laguna Beach. And this little picture shows a place where the White House restaurant is right now. If you know Laguna Beach, you might remember that. Frank Miller's youngest brother bought that little house, which is right in downtown Riverside, in about 1880, which is when their dad went down there and started surveying. And that's when they discovered what a beautiful place Laguna Beach was. And the guy who had married the oldest sister, Emma, was also surveying down there. So Christopher Columbus Miller, the father of the family, and the oldest brother-in-law of the family were hanging out in Laguna Beach, telling them what a beautiful place it was. And Ed went down there right away and bought some money, bought some land. And Alice really wanted to go and buy property, but she was really busy with the hotel. And so she put it on the back burner that I'll go to Laguna Beach later. She was doing things like throwing these fabulous brunches with palm fronds for Easter. And she was taking people on, this is a mural that's down on Van Buren Boulevard in the human computer building. But it was probably inspired by Alice, because she used to take the guests on a little trolley. The Mission had its own trolley, and she would take them on town tours out to Box Springs and get them fresh water off of Arrowhead Mountain. Then she'd take them through the orange groves, and then they go out to Chimamo Park and watch a polo game, and then they go over to Sherman Indian High School, and she'd take them out there and let the Sherman Indian football team defeat the USC team, which the kids loved about that. So she was and then they'd go to Mount Rubidale, and there'd be a car waiting at the foot of Mount Rubidale and drive them up to the top so they get a beautiful view of what a wonderful valley it was. She was great as a hotel lady. She was also very innovative in the hotel business. Nobody had waiters, or nobody had waitresses serving their meals. Alice thought, no, girls are better than men at this. I'm going to hire some women. The guests claimed that they loved the waitresses and they were far better than what they call them, the waiters of the greasy tuxedo that they were used to seeing in other hotels back east. She also, when business was slow here in Riverside, which it always was in the summertime, because nobody wants to come to Riverside in the summertime, they farmed themselves out. I'm sorry. Oh, what happened? Where am I? Is that good? No? Let me go back one. They farmed. Did it again. Oh, I was doing that. It's just that.
Is that on the page?
On the page. We'll move on after this. This is just showing me that they were at the Arcadia Hotel, the Pomona Hotel, the Long Beach Hotel. Summertime, they farmed themselves out and they had such a great reputation. Anybody was glad to have them come help manage their hotel, find out how to get more guests to come in and make more money. So because they had run these other hotels, while Stanley was growing up, Stanley grew up to be a great football player and went off to Cal Berkeley. They were free now not to have to stay at home and raise him anymore. They could go off and take jobs in faraway hotels. And they could also expand the Mission Inn because they had so much business they couldn't accommodate everybody who was coming. Are we doing okay now? Pictures? Yes, thank you. So this is the big, beautiful mission-style building inspired by the Christian Science Church over there, and the architect who built it, Arthur Benton. They decided they wanted to build a big destination hotel, and this was it. And it was wildly successful. 1903, they built this place. And Alice is still in charge, and Frank is conducting the architecture and making sure the building turns out right. Meantime, the very first guest, obviously, one of the very first guests at the hotel is the President of the United States. 1903, they open up their hotel, and the President comes. A good deal. So they're planting the parent navel orange tree in front of the hotel. And there's poor Mr. Roosevelt with the shovel in his hand. And they made him dig the hole. And Alice is nowhere in this picture. Everybody's out here celebrating. And where is Alice? She's in the kitchen with Swan, who's preparing a meal for all people who are going to be here. But look who this guy is. Can you see him play over there? Yeah. The guy with the parted hair? That's young son Stanley. He was not about to be excluded from the picture when the president was there. So he's there in the background having a good old time. But I want to tell you where Alice was when this happened. The first year that the Grand Destination Hotel opened up, the President of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt, was a guest. This was May 7th and 8th, 1903. There were grand preparations being made for his arrival, and Alice Richardson, manager of the hotel, went to the kitchen of the inn to speak to Chef Swan, who was Chinese, about the menu. She was dressed in a rather plain suit. And Swan, as she noticed, was dressed in his finest Chinese silks. She also noticed that Chef Swan looked at her with disapproval when she came in her plain suit. Swan felt that the arrival of the president was an event that should be honored by wearing her finest clothes. Chef Swan said to Mrs. Richardson, "You're not dressed very good, Mrs. Richardson. You're Mr. Miller's sister." And Alice thought for a moment about how reliable Swan was and what a great help he was at the hotel and how fond her brother was of him. And she said, "Very well, Swan. If you don't like this dress, I'll put on another." And later that same day, Alice, in a much finer dress, made sure that Swan in his finest Chinese silks was introduced to the United States president. Later, Swan would tell Alice how honored he was to be introduced to the president, but how disappointed he was at the president's commonplace work. The story goes that thereafter, if any question of the suitability of dress arose for a member of the Miller family, the response would be, "Go consult Swan on that." It was Mrs. Richardson's door that Swan would knock on in the middle of the night when there was a rumor that Chinese workers were being rounded up for deportation. Alice would get up and drive Swan and his family to a friend's ranch where no one could find them. Alice drove a car, Frank Miller didn't. Mrs. Richardson's dealings were described by her biographer as being direct and kind, whether she was receiving a royal guest or putting on another dress to please the Chinese folk. Nice little story about Alice and Swan. Okay. From there, the last line here is that when Alice went down to buy the property, it was one of the most attractive beaches between San Juan Capistrano and Santa Monica, and it undoubtedly had a promising future as a seaside resort, okay? So this is the beautiful property that she built, and she lived in the little house with the green roof, green pyramid roof, and she gave the house next door to her sister-in-law. Hi, come on in and sit down if you'd like. She gave the other house to Frank's sister-in-law, Rose Hardenberg, and the two of them spent their vacations there for the next 40 years. Of course, it changed over time. Alice had paid $10 for those lots that she bought at the time. This little ad on the left says those lots 20 years later were going for $1,500 a piece. And this is about the only time I saw any advertisement that they were proud that Alice lived in town. And way down there in the very bottom it says, this property is close to the residence of Mrs. Alice Richardson. Named her first. Then they named Frank Miller. And then they named the son-in-law DeWitt Hutchins. So that kind of shows you who had prestige in town and who didn't. So this is the way Alice's house looked a few years later. That's the little green, the pyramid house is Alice's. The next one is called the Italian Villa. And a few years later, it looked like this. And if you know your Laguna Beach area, this thing right here is called the Pirates Tower, and it's near 1,000 Steps Beach. And it's all very, very, very expensive real estate these days, and Alice did really well. This is the way it looks today. And this right here is the Villa Rockledge, where Alice's brother bought a house because she had a house down there and he loved it so much. Alice's house would be right here today, but there's a gigantic mansion there instead. And all of this property was hers. Wow. So she made a pretty darn good investment, plus a lot of plots in downtown Laguna Beach as well. Okay. So at the same time that she's making these investments for her nice vacation in Laguna Beach, there's a guy in Lake Tahoe who has built a beautiful, big hotel, and nobody's coming there. This is the first hotel to be built in Lake Tahoe, and it was hard to get to. He built a boat, an unsinkable boat that carried 250 people. He was expecting 250 people at a time to arrive at his hotel, but nobody was coming. And he also built a little narrow gauge train to go out and meet on the pier. He built a train to go out and pick up the people from the boat, and they took them right into the lobby of his hotel. But nobody came until he hired Alice and her husband. And here's the ad. It says, Frank W. Richardson, manager. They didn't mention Alice as manager, but they hired them as a team. And the same thing happened when she went to work at the other hotels and all that. It always said Frank W. Richardson, her husband, as manager. But everybody knew that Alice was the brilliant one who knew how to run a hotel and bring people in. So if Frank Richardson was alive, I suppose it was a poor reflection on him to have his wife be his boss. So we have Frank W. Richardson, manager for the American. It was $3 a day to go stay at the Tahoe Tavern. And this was the first year that they had come there. The Tahoe Tavern lost $27,000, and that was a lot of money in 1904, the year that it opened up. The year that Alice and Frank Richardson come, they make $27,000 in profits that year. And here's another ad that says, Tahoe Tavern on Lake Tahoe, the largest, most beautiful body of water in the world, at this elevation, now open. The tavern will be conducted this season by Mr. F.W. Richardson, no mention of Alice, manager of California's most famous Mission Hotel, the Glenwood Riverside. I guarantee that it will be strictly first class. Sure, yeah, Alice and Frank together made it strictly first class. So Alice didn't care if she didn't get any credit or not. She just went ahead and did a great job. First thing she did was go out and hire fishermen all day long to catch these tremendous 30-pound trouts that they had in Lake Tahoe. And then she hired 3 great chefs to run the place. People came. She hired an orchestra to come up because they had a ballroom. Look at the beautiful ballroom. And all the views from the rooms were this beautiful. So, whereas people had never been to Tahoe before, Alice had all these friends who used to come to the Mission Inn and loved her hospitality. So she put out the word that she was going to Tahoe for the summer, running a great, big, wonderful hotel. And pretty soon it was filled up with her friends from Riverside and Los Angeles and anybody who had ever been to a hotel that Alice had run before. They flocked up there, and all of a sudden Tahoe was on the map as a great, great place. So she runs it really successfully. It's just busy as all get out. She's doing things like taking people on horseback picnics. They have excursions and moonlight to look at the stars on the lake. She's really successful, and here's a rare picture. There's her husband, Frank Richardson, Alice sitting there enjoying Lake Tahoe for a minute with a friend. Unfortunately, Mr. Richardson has a heart condition and he doesn't do well at 6,300 square feet above sea level. And he has a heart attack and dies. And Alice has been running this hotel very successfully and the Mission Inn without Frank's help. I mean, he was kind of her assistant, but he certainly wasn't in charge. So when the husband dies, Alice goes ahead and says, I would like to continue working, and they offer her salary and her ex-husband's salary if she will please, not ex-husband, her late husband's salary, if she will please come back and continue running the hotel in the great way she has been. And of course she does, and she's thrilled to. And finally, we get Alice Richardson as manager. The first time we see this. And here she is down on one of her picnics that she has taken on horseback to take everyone to. They were wildly successful. Okay, so everything was great at the Tahoe Tavern, and I don't know why, but in 1909 she decides that she needs to come back and work at the Mission Inn. And so she just leaves the Tahoe Tavern and never goes back again. And she comes back here to the beautiful Mission Inn. And things are happening at the Mission Inn. They have an Indian conference, the first Indian conference where they invited the chiefs of the tribes, as well as the Bureau of Indian Affairs, as well as a lot of people around town who cared about what happened to the Indian people. And as you can see, here's Frank Miller sitting on the curb with his Indian friends, and there's all the men of the Indian tribe. And of course, Alice is probably in the kitchen making lunch. They also had piano recitals. They had a lot of pianos at the Mission Inn. As you can see, there was a story that there were over 100 pianos at the Mission Inn. And Alice thought it'd be a fun idea to invite all the music teachers to bring their piano students over and have a grand piano concert. And that's what they did. All these are kids from Riverside who lived in and took piano lessons from some great pianists. What else? Where we go? Okay. She also spent a lot of time when she could vacationing in Laguna Beach. And this is William Wendt's house. He lived right behind her across Coast Highway. And William Wendt is like the most famous Laguna Beach artist ever. And he lived right behind her. He liked to paint from his backyard, and he painted a lot of pictures of Alice's house in front because it had this little green roof that stuck up. I found 5 paintings of William Wendt's where Alice is featured in it. And this is him painting probably her house. And this is the painting that we have in the hotel that shows the little green pyramid roof right there. That's the one that was built in 1894, and she lived in there and went for her vacation there all the time. Her brother would eventually build a house over here. But at this time, this is a 1918 picture, and this shows what it looks like from the Coast Highway. Not very impressive, but a lovely place to live. And there was also lots of artists in Laguna Beach who became friends with Alice. This guy's name is Frank Kupria, and he liked to paint ocean scenes from right outside Alice's window. He ended up living in her basement for a long time. And all this art and the friends that they had, artists in Laguna Beach, ended up that the Riverside Mission Inn became a center for art. And we built a big, beautiful art gallery, and we filled it up with wonderful art that came from Laguna Beach and showed all the beautiful landscapes in California. And the guests at the Mission Inn just bought it. It went off the walls like hotcakes. They couldn't paint fast enough. So we were not only being a hotel, we were an art center, we were selling antiques. And see, these are some of the fabulous paintings that are in the collection. You've probably never seen them. They're not lit well enough to see them like this, but this is a Spanish painting from Mexico. This is a Russian, this is a Russian painting. It's in White's restaurant. Very famous, very beautiful. This is a really terrific Hispanic painting by Hernando Viejo that we're still researching, and this is really wonderful scenes. There's lots and lots of wonderful art like that they created. This painting is of Frank Miller. It's painted by the guest that Alice talked into painting again after he had given it up. This painting is another painting by Frank Miller. These are both in basements at the Riverside Metropolitan Museum. This one is of Alice, and the minute I saw it, I thought he was in love with Alice. She's not that beautiful, but he painted her really lovely. And the colors that he used, the guy's palette is really bad in color. There's browns and grays and greens that he put in the face to make her look so beautiful. And it's really, really a wonderful painting. His paintings are very valuable. He had a very successful gallery in Grand Central Station in New York. And then there were the writers who came to the hotel. This guy is Harold Wright. He fell in love with Alice and he moved into the hotel, stayed there for 3 years. They had something of a relationship. Maurice dug up some really passionate letters from them. You're going to have to read the book to find out about it, but she was a woman that men loved. And Harold Wright tried to get her to marry him, and he wouldn't. But he wrote one of his books down at her house, and while he was writing a book at her house, Frank Miller was building this big, great, big, beautiful 115 feet of oceanfront house. He spent $110,000 on it in 1918. And it's just across the canyon from Alice's house. So they were neighbors when they lived down there. And he became a big, important part of Boonville Beach at that point, too. This is the trail you take to get from Frank's house to Alice's house. And there were a lot of parts left over when he built that great, big, beautiful house in Laguna Beach. So they came back to the Mission Inn and they built their own suites up on the rooftop. This is where the roller skating rink used to be, and Alice thought the roller skating rink was really too noisy for a nice hotel. So this is Alice's suite, and it's made from parts left over from the Villa Rockledge. And this is Frank's suite, which is right across the courtyard from Alice's. They can look out the window and see if each other's lights are still on. And this is also made from parts left over from the Villa Rockledge. While they were building these house rooms for themselves on the top of the Mission Inn, they went to Japan for a trip, and they spent like 6 months. They went with a lady named Jane Addams, who was a really famous social reformer, and they took a whole group of people with them, and they went to Japan and China and the Oregon, the Philippines, and they visited, they had a lot of employees who were from those countries, and they visited their families when they went to those places. They also visited the heads of the state, but they were charmed by the hospitality that they received from the families of their employees here at the hotel. And they never called them employees; they were the household staff. They were more than just staff. So actually, they got in. I'm going to go back here for a minute. This is the Fujikan room. And when they came back from China and Japan, they had brought all kinds of wonderful art things with them, and they set up a whole Oriental section of the hotel. There's an outdoor court with a koi pond that went through it, and a tea garden, and then they have this room with all these beautiful things in them. They really went out on the limb to embrace the Japanese community and the Chinese community and the Russian community and the Irish community, who were all immigrants who were being discriminated against for one reason or another. They had a great big meeting to bring all the Japanese businessmen. 50 Japanese businessmen came for a big dinner, and Frank and Alice got up and told them what a wonderful trip they had had to Japan and how much they loved the Japanese people. And this is all the time when the Haradas were trying to be chased out of the town and not allowed to buy a house because of the Japanese Exclusion Act. And the Millers, Alice and Frank, offered to help them buy the house if they needed it. And they were very supportive of the Harada family and Japanese and minorities that worked for them. They were very kind to him throughout. Alice's son, Stanley, turned out to be a really good kid. He helped a lot up in Lake Tahoe. He ended up joining the Coast Guard. He went to war in World War I. That's the reason that Frank and Alice contributed so much to the Belgian Relief Fund, because Stanley was stationed in Belgium for a while. He also lived in Hawaii most of his life, and Alice spent a lot of time traveling to Hawaii to visit him. But when he retired, here he has retired after 20 years in the military, and you can see Alice is delighted that he's back. And he comes and settles in Riverside and buys a house in the Wood Streets at first, and then he buys one up on Sunset Drive overlooking Holly High School. And in the meantime, Frank and Alice are adding like crazy onto the hotel. They're building the rotunda wing and this beautiful Amistad dome and the staircase. And they're building Author's Row with these fabulous flying buttresses. And meantime, the children are stepping up to the plate because Frank is getting kind of tired and doesn't want to run the hotel anymore, and the responsibility is kind of a lot for Alice because they're both in their 70s now. So here's Frank's daughter, also named Alice, and her husband DeWitt, and they established the Flyers Wall, and we got into a lot of flying stuff after that. And they actually were anxious to take over the hotel and have Alice retire, but Alice was not quite ready. She was still sending out postcards of herself pictured in front of the fireplace in the Mission Inn with poems from one of our favorite poets that used to come and stay at the Mission Inn all the time. And this one is Frank dies, and Alice sends out a card. And a lot of people didn't even know that Alice was Frank's sister. So when she signs this card, she says, from Frank Miller's sister Alice, and she's thanking people for all their consideration. And then 3 years later, here's a little bit I wanted to read to you. The place, this is something that a travel writer wrote about the mission is. The place is a monument to the good taste and the restless brain of Frank Miller. It's trying to say that any man who does a task beyond the average succeeds because he has other people to do his work, but the actual working manager of the place is Alice Richardson, sister of the master of the inn. Brother and sister work together, each with special gifts in the way of ability. Mrs. Richardson is smiling, low-voiced, gentle, friendly, appreciative, seeing everything and loaded and nothing. No guest is overlooked, none is loaded with attention. You have everything you want, and the things you do not want are not forced upon you. Alice Richardson is one of the great housekeepers of the world. She can feed 1,000 people with the same ease and grace and excellence that the average, intelligent, well-bred, and well-brought-up woman can feed and care for 3 or 4 or 5. Only the great Mother Heart could ever look after guests at Riverside in the same superb way that Mrs. Richardson does. She is sort of a superwoman. Nothing seems to annoy her. She has no troubles, and although she must carry great responsibilities, she carries them well balanced. The Glenwood Mission Inn supplies exquisite service, cuisine, beds, furnishings, baths, movie crew, art gallery, all reflect the consecrated spirit of the mission of the olden time. And not to know Riverside and Glenwood is not to know California. And not to know California is not to know America. Take that. So here we are, and 3 years later, Mrs. Richardson dies. She has an accident. She falls down the stairs, and that suite of hers up on the 4th floor with a really skinny staircase, breaks her shoulder, and 6 weeks later, she's gone. They had a wonderful ceremony for her. Thousands of people turned out. She's buried in a green ceremony. And even 2 years later, they were putting up a stained glass window of her in her honor, and she is called they named her after, this is patron Saint Martha, the patron saint of hospitality. Alice always wore a pink shawl, and she made sure that you had a basket of fruit and flowers in your room. And she was beloved by everybody who came through the hotel. And that's the end of the story, and I hope you appreciate what an important woman she was in Riverside, and we can celebrate another woman's great contributions to Riverside. Thank you. And is there any questions? All right.
Thank you so much. We are delighted to have had you here tonight. We have some special treats. We have some cookies for you in the spirit of hospitality.
She would.
We have lemon cookies in honor of the citrus industry, and then a cookie that's actually called the Riverside cookie. It's a lemon cookie dipped half in chocolate. So those are by the cookie shop at the Rockton Arcade, and we have some water and cookies back here for you. So enjoy.
Thank you.
Barbara.
Thank you very much. Yes.
I did have a question. I read somewhere on the mission was actually started out as like a boarding house.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and then they took it from there.
The story is that there was a hotel over where the old library was, and it was like the only hotel in town, and a lot of the workers who were building the canals, who were the friends of Mr. Miller's father, were staying in the hotel, and the night that it burned down, Mr. Miller said he's got to offer these gentlemen who he works with a place to stay in his own house, and his wife said, okay, we'll do it. And that is the day that they started the hotel business. And then, so it was just a boarding house at first, but they were so good at it, people wanted to stay in their boarding house. It just snowballed.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else?
Can you tell me more about her connection with the annex?
Well, the annex was built as a dormitory for women. I think they put the first, Arthur Benton built it, and he's the architect of the hotel and the Christian Science Church. And it's like a little mini mission inn. The rooms are really small, but it's got arches and spiral staircases and fountains, and it's got rooms for painting and rooms for music and rooms for writing. And it was just supposed to be a really comfortable, hospitable place for the staff to stay. And it was so successful, and the women liked it so much that about 4 years later, they added on a men's wing to it. So there's a men's dormitory and a women's dormitory, so you can live right behind the hotel and not have to worry about finding a place to stay. And then, of course, over the years, it became studios for the annex did. As the staff moved out there, it became studios for artists and local craftspeople and things like that. And hopefully someday they'll open up and use it again. Anybody else? All right, well, thank you very much.
I'm gonna put these on here so that we don't blast the meeting. Yeah, you can turn the lights back.
Multiple percent.